year was 1889. Dry Willow was not a town. It was a stopping point, a place where the desert paused to catch its breath and spit red dust. The dust coated everything. It found its way into coffee cups and gun barrels. The sun had bleached the main street to the color of old bone. Most signs hung at an angle. Defeated. The sign for the Dry Willow General Store had lost its W. The only building that seemed to push back against the decay was Mags's saloon. Its doors swung open and shut, releasing bursts of piano notes and arguments. Mags's was where news arrived and where lies were born, and the whiskey was just strong enough to make a man forget which was which. The stagecoach that pulled in was not the regular one. It was a rickety wagon pulled by two exhausted mules. It stopped in the center of the street, and the squeal of its brakes was the only sound for a long minute. Then the whispers started. They moved from the porch of the saloon to the steps of the general store. A young woman climbed down. She moved stiffly, favoring one side. She was perhaps 19, or maybe 20. It was hard to tell. The dust had settled on her dark dress and in the lines of her face. She held a single cloth bag, clutched tight in one hand. A bruise, faded to a sickly yellow and purple, marked the line of her jaw. She kept her chin high, as if daring the sun to strike her, but her knuckles on the bag were white. The whispers followed her. They were not loud, but they were heavy. People spoke behind their hands, but the words carried. She was the one. The girl Kincaid had arranged for, the one who had come from the east. Whispers that she was the bartered item, the final piece of a land deal. Eliza Hart heard them. She felt the eyes of the town on her, not as a person, as a parcel. She looked for water, for any sign of life that was not stained with judgment. Her eyes landed on a man standing apart from the others, by the water trough. He was Navajo. He stood next to a strong black horse, running his hand along the animal's neck while the horse drank deeply. He was tall, and he wore his silence like armor. He did not seem to hear the whispers. He was focused on the simple, necessary task of giving his horse water. When the horse lifted its head, water dripping from its muzzle, the man looked up. His eyes met Eliza's. It lasted only a second. She had expected the same hot stare the other men gave her, or the cold pity of the women. His gaze was neither. It was flat and clear and deep. He was not looking at a parcel. He was not looking at a fallen woman. He was looking at a human being standing in the heat. It was the absence of judgment that struck her, striking her harder than an open hand. Then he turned his attention back to his horse. His duty done. His name was Talasnez. A different sound broke the street's attention. The clean, sharp click of expensive boots on the wooden boardwalk. Silas Kincaid emerged from the hotel, and he was a man who did not belong in the dust. He wore a black wool suit, buttoned tight, despite the white sun pressing down with a weight of 100 degrees. A film of sweat shone on his upper lip, but he ignored it. He was a man who believed he could ignore the desert itself. He was speaking to two men who walked a step behind him, men in city hats who looked bored and dangerous, Pinkertons. Kincaid did not lower his voice. He wanted the street to hear his ambition. "The valley, gentlemen, that is the artery," he said, gesturing toward the low mountains to the east. "The river is the blood, and that blood will feed my railroad. I want tracks laid through that valley by harvest. I do not care what treaties the savages claim. I have paper, legal paper." Eliza watched him. This was the man whose name had been spoken in hushed tones on the long journey. The man who had bought her passage, the man who, she was told, now owned her time. She turned away, the sickness rising in her throat. She needed air or shade or something clean. She saw the chapel at the end of the street. It was a small, warped building, its steeple barely a suggestion. The door was ajar. She pushed it open. The air inside was hot and still, smelling of dry rot and old hymns. Reverend Pike was on his knees at the front, his back to her. He was praying loudly, asking God to deliver his flock from temptation. The floorboard creaked under Eliza's foot. The Reverend stopped his prayer. He turned, his eyes wide. He saw her standing in the doorway, half in shadow. He knew instantly who she was. His face, already pale and thin, seemed to collapse. He saw the bruise on her cheek. He saw the exhaustion, and he looked away. He looked at the floor, at the wall, at the empty cross. He could not hold her gaze. "The town is full of sin," he mumbled. "Not to her, but to the floor. We must pray for strength." Eliza said nothing. She saw the shame in his eyes, the weakness. He was a man hiding from the very souls he was meant to save. She backed out of the chapel, pulling the door shut, leaving him to his noise. The tension in Dry Willow was thick enough to cut. Kincaid's ambition was one edge of the knife. The Pinkertons were the other. They loitered near Maggs's, watching the Navajo who had come to trade. They watched Talus. Their presence was a promise of a different kind of law. The conflict was clear: Kincaid's legal papers versus the earth the Navajo had walked for 1,000 years. Talus finished with his horse. He swung himself into the saddle in one fluid motion. The sunlight caught something on his wrist. It was a heavy silver bracelet, wide and hammered with symbols that spoke of rain and corn. It was old, a gift from his grandmother, Atsa. It was a reminder of his vows. Eliza clutched her own bag. Inside, beneath her few spare clothes, was a folded piece of paper. It was a map given to her by a kind couple, Luis and Rosa, who had helped her during the first part of her escape. They had asked her to hold it, to keep it safe. She thought it was just a survey, perhaps a deed to their small plot. She did not know its value. She did not know that the lines drawn in faded ink did not show the river, but the hidden underground springs, the sweet water. The water Kincaid's railroad needed more than steel. The day began to die. The sun bled out over the western cliffs, staining the sky purple and orange. The heat finally broke, but the cool air brought no relief. Eliza knew she could not stay. She was not property. She would not be Kincaid's parcel. She waited until the shadows were long, until the street was empty. She slipped out of the hotel, keeping to the side of the buildings. She moved past the livery, toward the trail that led out of town, the one that headed north, away from the river valley. She made it to the alley between the blacksmith and the feed store. "Ma'am." A voice stopped her. Two men stepped out of the shadows, blocking her path. They were not the Pinkertons. They were rougher men, hired for different work. "Mr. Kincaid was worried about you," the first one said. His voice was oily. "He wants to ensure his property is comfortable." The second man just smiled, showing broken teeth. Eliza stepped back, her hand gripping the strap of her bag. The alley was a dead end behind her. Across the street, hidden in the deep shadow of the saloon's awning, Talus Nez sat on his black horse. He had not left. He had been watching the town, waiting. He saw the woman. He saw the men move to corner her. He saw the fear in the way she held herself, and the defiance. He watched the shadows merge, and his hand tightened, very slowly, on his reins. The man with the broken teeth lunged, grabbing her arm. "Mister, Kincaid is a patient man, but he does not like his investments to walk away." "I am not an investment," Eliza said, twisting violently. She tried to bring her bag around to strike him, but the second man, the oily one, caught it. "What is in the bag, little bird?" he hissed, yanking the strap. "Give it here." "No." It was not a plea. It was a command. The force of it surprised them both, and for a second, the man loosened his grip. A third man stepped from the shadows. He was one of the Pinkertons she had seen with Kincaid, his city hat pulled low. He did not look at her, but at the bag. "Stop playing, gentlemen. Get the papers. Kincaid wants the map." Map Eliza's blood ran cold. They knew about the map. The oily man laughed and pulled the bag free. As he did, a low moan filled the air. It was not human. It was the sound of the desert drawing a deep, angry breath. The wind, which had been a hot whisper all day, suddenly slammed into the alley like a fist. It tore the man's hat from his head and sent it tumbling. "Damn it!" the Pinkerton cursed, looking up at the sky. The sky was no longer blue. It was a churning wall of red and black, moving toward them at the speed of a train. The storm. Get her and get to shelter. The man with the broken teeth grabbed Eliza's hair. She screamed as he pulled her head back. "Let her go!" The voice was not loud, but it cut through the rising shriek of the wind. Talas Nez was there, at the mouth of the alley, his black horse shifting nervously beneath him. He was a silhouette against the dying, poisoned light. The Pinkerton's hand went to his coat. "This is not your affair. Navajo, ride on." Talas looked at the man holding Eliza's hair. He said nothing. He simply urged his horse forward one step. The animal was large, and it filled the narrow space. The oily man, still holding Eliza's bag, stepped back. "There is one of him and three of us." The Pinkerton knew better. He saw the way the man sat his horse. He saw the stillness, but he could not back down. "I said, ride on." The wind answered him. The wall of dust hit Dry Willow. It was not like nightfall. It was like being buried. The world disappeared in a suffocating roar of grit. Eliza was blinded, choking. The hand in her hair was gone. She heard a man shout in pain, a sound swallowed by the storm. She staggered, unable to breathe, her eyes sealed shut with sand. A hand, strong and sure, closed around her upper arm. It was not one of the henchmen. She was lifted, pulled clean off her feet, and thrown sideways onto the back of the horse, in front of the saddle. "Hold on," Talas's voice said, right by her ear. She wrapped her arms around his waist, burying her face against the rough cotton of his shirt. The horse lunged, not into the street, but deeper into the maze of alleys. Eliza could see nothing. She could only hear the wind, a sound so loud it seemed to have a physical weight, pressing against her eardrums. Talas did not seem to need his eyes. He guided the horse through the blindness, turning left, then right, moving away from the town. She could feel the muscles in his back tense as he controlled the frightened animal. He was navigating a world that no longer existed, reading it by memory, by the feel of the ground beneath the horse's hooves. The air grew thicker. Breathing was a conscious, painful effort. The sand was not just in the air. It was a million tiny needles driving into her skin. She felt the horse scramble up a short incline. The wind howled, trying to tear her from the saddle. Then, suddenly, the sound changed. The roar was muffled, as if a door had been shut. Talas pulled the horse to a stop. "Get down." He slid from the saddle and pulled her down after him. She fell to her knees on stone. She opened her eyes. They were in a narrow cleft between two massive boulders, a hollow in the rock just deep enough to hold them and the horse. The wind screamed over the top of the opening, but inside, the air was almost still. Eliza leaned against the rock wall, coughing, spitting out mud. Her lungs burned. Talas was already tending to his horse, wiping the animal's eyes and nostrils with a cloth he pulled from a saddlebag. He worked with an economy of motion, his focus entirely on the animal. Eliza finally caught her breath. Her throat was raw. "They took my bag." Talas did not look at her. "Yes, you saw them." "I saw them." She pushed herself up, anger replacing her fear. "Why did you wait? They took it." He turned then, and his eyes were as hard as the rock around them. "I was not there for your bag. I was not there for you. I was there because Kincaid's men are dogs, and I do not like dogs in my town." The words stung. She was a fool to think this was rescue. It was just one man's pride colliding with another's. "I am not your concern. I know." "Good," he said. He turned back to his horse. They stood in silence. The only sound was the muffled thunder of the storm outside, a world being taken apart by wind. Eliza's arm, where the man had grabbed her, throbbed. She was alone, trapped with a man who despised her, with nothing left in the world but the clothes on her back. A brilliant, blue-white flash lit the hollow, etching their shadows against the stone. It was followed an instant later by a crack of thunder so loud it shook the ground. The horse whinnied, stamping its feet. Talas flinched. It was not a large movement. It was a violent, inward shudder, as if he had been struck. He put a hand on the horse's neck to calm it, but Eliza saw his hand. In the dim light, she saw it tremble. It was a tremor he could not control, a deep, rattling vibration that started in his bones. His eyes were fixed on the opening of the cave, but he was not seeing the storm. He was seeing something else. She saw the reflection of a different light in his pupils, the hot, orange light of a fire. He was breathing too fast. His nostrils flared. Eliza said nothing. She had seen that look before, in men who had survived battles, the look of a man watching his own past burn down around him. The thunder rolled away, and the tremor in his hand slowly subsided. He mastered himself, forcing the breath back into his lungs. He did not look at her. He was ashamed that she, a white woman, a stranger, had seen this crack in his armor. The storm raged for hours. They did not speak again. When the wind finally quieted, it was near dawn. The world outside was a strange, new landscape, buried under 2 feet of red sand. The air was cold and clean. Talas led his horse out of the cleft. He looked back at her. "Come." She followed him. They walked for nearly an hour, the horse sinking to its hocks in the fresh drifts. He led her to a place she would never have found, a small camp tucked under an overhang of rock, sheltered from the worst of the wind. A small fire, banked with stones, was already smoking. An old woman sat by the fire, wrapped in a blanket. She was so wrinkled that her face seemed to be a map of the very canyons around them. This was Atsa, his grandmother. She watched Eliza approach, her black eyes missing nothing. She saw the bruise, the torn dress, the exhaustion. Atsa spoke to Talas in the flowing, guttural sounds of the Navajo language. He answered her in a low voice, his words short. Then the old woman looked directly at Eliza. Her English was clear, accented but strong. "He tells me you lost what the white man wanted." "He took my bag," Eliza said. "Bags can be replaced," Atsa said, holding her hands out to the small fire. "Kincaid does not fight for bags. He fights for what is under the land. The white man always fights for what he can dig up, or what he can build over. He has forgotten the water." The old woman's eyes lifted, meeting Eliza's. "You be careful of the water. Water is life. But in this war, water will be the blood. It will be spilled, and men will die for it." Back in Dry Willow, the town was digging itself out. Reverend Pike stood in the lobby of the hotel, twisting his hat in his hands. The storm had torn half the roof from his chapel. Silas Kincaid was at a table, eating breakfast as if nothing had happened. He had eggs and bacon and coffee in a clean china cup. "A terrible storm, Reverend," Kincaid said, not looking up. "Divine judgment, perhaps." "Mr. Kincaid, the chapel, the roof. It is a disaster. The town fund is empty." Kincaid slowly finished his coffee. He reached into his coat and placed a thick white envelope on the table. "The Lord's work must continue. Pike, my company is always happy to contribute to the spiritual health of a community." Reverend Pike stared at the envelope. He knew what it was. It was not a donation. It was a price. I cannot," he whispered. "Of course you can," Kincaid said softly. "It is for the church's repairs. Think of your flock. Think of the children who need catechism." Pike's hand, thin and pale, crept across the table. It trembled, just as Talas's had, but this was not the tremor of memory. It was the tremor of weakness. His fingers closed around the envelope. He pulled it back. "God bless you, Mr. Kincaid," he said, his voice thick. "Yes," Kincaid said, signaling for more coffee. "I am sure he will." At Talas's camp, Eliza had been given water and a piece of fry bread. When Atsa and Talas spoke, she moved away, needing to be alone. She found her dress pocket. The oily man had been rough, but he had been focused on the bag. She slid her hand inside. Her fingers brushed against the small, hard corner of a button. And nothing else. Her heart stopped. He had taken it. The Pinkerton. He had known what to look for. Wait. She shoved her hand deeper, feeling along the seam, the one she had painstakingly re-sewn herself just a week ago. The thread was still tight. She tore at it, her nails ripping the heavy cotton. Inside the lining, her fingers found it, the folded paper, the map. They had searched her, but they had not been thorough enough. The Pinkerton had wanted the bag. Assuming the map was inside it, they had not guessed she would keep it on her person. She pulled it out, her hands shaking. She unfolded it just enough to see the faded lines. Luis and Rosa's map, the map of the Sweet Water Springs. Atsa's words came back to her. Water will be the blood of this war. She was not just a runaway. She was not just a bartered bride. She was a woman holding a weapon. She folded the map and hid it deep within her bodice. She would not lose it again. Talas was packing his saddlebags. He was finished with her. He would leave her here, and she would have to find her own way. She walked over to him, her shadow falling across his hands. He stopped his work. "I need to get to the river valley," she said. Her voice was not the voice of the girl in the alley. It was firm. He grunted. "The valley is not safe for you." "I do not care if it is safe. I am not asking you to protect me. I am carrying something that does not belong to me. It belongs to a family there. Luis and Rosa. I have to return it." She would not tell him what it was. She would not tell anyone. Talas studied her. He saw the new hardness in her eyes. He saw that she was no longer just running from something. She was running to something. He looked east, toward the valley. His valley. He thought of Kincaid. He thought of the broken men who had grabbed her. He thought of the water. He gave a single sharp nod. "Kincaid's men will be watching the main trail, especially after the storm. They will be looking for you. We will not use the trail." He threw a blanket roll at her feet. "We leave in 1 hour." In Dry Willow, the sand from the storm was still being shoveled into piles. Silas Kincaid used the chaos to tighten his grip. He stood in the sheriff's small, hot office, smiling. "Security. Sheriff, that is all I am suggesting," Kincaid said. He placed a freshly printed poster on the desk. It declared a new town ordinance, effective immediately, establishing checkpoints on all roads for the safety of the good people of this town. Sheriff Ortega looked at the paper. He was a man worn down by heat and helplessness. He looked at the man who stood next to Kincaid, Deputy Crow. Crow was a man who enjoyed the small authorities given to him. He was already wearing a new, shining badge, paid for by Kincaid's company. "Silas, this is not law. This is your law," Ortega said, his voice tired. "The storm caused unrest." "Sheriff," Crow said, his voice slick. "And that girl, the one who ran off, she stole from Mr. Kincaid. We have to secure the territory from thieves." Ortega looked at his ledger book, open on his desk. His budget for the entire year was less than what Kincaid spent on whiskey in a week. He was outgunned by the Pinkertons, and now he was being outmaneuvered by his own deputy. He picked up his pen and signed the ordinance. He had no choice. Across the street, at Maggs's saloon, the war of words had already begun. The oily man who had lost Eliza's bag was drinking hard and talking loud. He was painting a new picture of the girl who had escaped. "I tell you, I saw her. He said to the bar, she was no innocent. She was a runaway, a whore from back east, playing coy, tried to rob me. She did, stole Mr. Kincaid's private papers." Maggs Doyle, the owner, wiped a glass behind the bar. She had heard 100 such stories. She knew the sound of a lie. It was always too loud, too desperate. The men in the saloon, however, drank it up. It was a better story. The girl was not a victim. She was a villain. The whispers turned from pity to judgment. It was easier that way. Miles away. Eliza Hart felt that judgment in the silence of the man leading her. Talus had given her a water skin and a piece of dried meat. He rode his black horse. She walked. He had not offered her a place in the saddle. This was not a partnership. He was an escort, and she was baggage. The sun beat on her. Her feet, in their thin city shoes, were blistered and bleeding. She did not complain. She set her jaw and matched the horse's pace. She had asked for this. She would see it through. Talus kept them off the trails, moving through a landscape of broken rock and towering sandstone pillars. He seemed to be reading a map that only he could see. He moved with a purpose that was both comforting and terrifying. He was a man who belonged to this hard land. She was an intruder. They entered a narrow canyon as the sun began to dip, painting the high walls a deep, blood orange. The air grew still. The only sound was the clack of the horse's hooves on the stone. Talus stopped. He did not make a sound. He simply ceased all motion. His head was tilted, listening. Eliza froze, her breath caught in her throat. "What is it?" she whispered. He slid from the horse, pulling his rifle from the saddle scabbard. "Get behind the rock, now!" She did not argue. She scrambled behind a low boulder. The shot came. It was not a pop. It was a deafening crack that echoed, multiplying itself. A chip of stone exploded from the rock face. 3 inches from Eliza's head, she screamed, pressing herself flat against the ground. A second shot followed, hitting the ground where Talus's horse had been. The animal screamed in terror, but Talus held its reins, pulling it back into the cover of the canyon wall. "He is high," Talus said. His voice was calm, a cold point of stillness in the chaos. "He is on the north rim. 1 man." "A Pinkerton," Eliza whispered, her heart hammering. "He shoots too well for a Pinkerton," Talus said. He edged his rifle around the rock, scanning the rim. The setting sun was in his eyes. He could see nothing but a blaze of orange light. The shooter was patient. He did not fire again. He knew he had them pinned. Night was coming. When the darkness was full, he could move in, or he could wait for them to freeze. Eliza's mind raced. They were trapped. The man above them held all the power. He had the high ground, the light, and the patience. She looked at Talus. He was watching the rim, his face a mask of concentration. His saddlebag was near her. Tied to it was a small, tin lantern. An idea sparked, born of desperation. She crawled to the bag, her movements slow. Talus did not look at her, his eyes still on the rim. She fumbled in her pocket for the small box of matches she always carried. Her hands were shaking, but she managed to strike one. The tiny flare of light seemed monstrously bright in the deep shadow. She opened the lantern, lit the wick, and closed the glass. "What are you doing?" Talus hissed, finally looking at her. "That light will bring him right to us." "Exactly," she said. Her voice shook, but she held the lantern steady. "He thinks we are here." She took a deep breath. "But we are not." With all her strength, she threw the lit lantern. It sailed in a high arc, not toward the shooter, but 20 yards down the canyon, clattering into a different cluster of boulders. It landed on its side, the small flame protected by the glass, casting a weak, flickering yellow light. It was a perfect, desperate lie. They waited. 1 second, 2. The rifle cracked again from the rim. The bullet smashed into the rock right above the lantern, sending sparks into the air. The muzzle flash. A small orange star, high on the rim, visible for half a second. Talus's rifle was already at his shoulder. He did not aim at the flash. He aimed just above it, where a man's head would be. He did not fire to kill. He fired to speak. He fired 1 shot. The bullet whined off the stone. They heard a sharp curse echo down the canyon, followed by the sound of loose rocks scattering. The sound of a man scrambling away in a hurry. Silence returned. Talus lowered his rifle. He let out a long, slow breath. He looked at Eliza. The disdain was gone from his eyes. It was replaced by something else. A hard, grudging respect. She had not panicked. She had thought. They did not camp there. He led her on in the darkness, moving for another hour until he found a shallow cave, hidden behind a curtain of dry brush. There would be no fire. They sat in the cold dark. The near-death experience had broken something open in Eliza. She had to make him understand. "They do not just want the map," she said into the darkness. Talas was cleaning his rifle, the soft scrape of the cloth the only sound. "I was not just sold," she continued, the words tasting like ash. "I was not a bride. I was a witness." He stopped cleaning. "I was a maid in the house in St. Louis where Kincaid made his deals. I served them brandy. They thought I was furniture. They thought I was deaf and dumb." She was shaking now, the memory of it cold and sharp. "I heard everything. I heard Kincaid laughing with that railroad man. He said the contracts for the valley were forged. He said he had bought the signatures. And I heard him talk about Reverend Pike. He said the Reverend was cheap. He said a small donation would buy his silence and his blessing." Talas was utterly still. "I saw the real maps," she whispered, "the ones showing the springs. Kincaid said the railroad would own the water, and the town would pay him for every drop. He said the Navajo could drink sand. I ran. I took what money I had. But they caught me. The Pinkertons. They said I was a thief. They were going to put me in prison. But Kincaid had a different idea. He said he would take me west. He said I would be part of his arrangement, a gift to keep me silent, to keep me where he could watch me. They put me on that wagon and called me a parcel." She had finally said it, the whole ugly truth. Talas finished his work. He set the rifle down. He understood now. This white woman was not just a victim. She was carrying a truth that could burn Kincaid's empire to the ground. She was not baggage. She was a weapon. Before dawn, he left her. He told her to stay hidden and not to move. He was gone for 3 hours. He rode hard, meeting his grandmother Atsa at a prearranged place. He told her of the ambush. He told her what the girl had said. Atsa listened, her ancient face unreadable. When he was finished, she pointed not to the canyon, but to the dry riverbed below them. "The white man thinks he can own the land," she said. "He thinks his paper makes it his. He does not understand. The land owns itself. The river is the heart. It is alive. It watches. It does not choose the strong or the rich. It chooses the one who will guard it. It chooses its keeper. You must guard this woman. Talas. She carries the river's words." As she spoke, a young Navajo rider approached, his horse slick with sweat. He slid to a stop. He had news. He had been scouting Kincaid's main railroad camp. He spoke in a low, urgent voice to Talas. Eliza, when Talas returned, saw the change in him immediately. The hard respect was gone, replaced by a cold, dead emptiness. He looked as if he had seen a ghost. The young rider had brought news of his brother, Ashki, the brother Talas had watched die, he thought, in the fire that had taken his wife, the fire set by land hunters. Ashki was alive. The rider had seen him. Ashki was not a prisoner. He was working. He was a scout, riding with the men. He was wearing the clothes of a company man. He was hunting his own people for white man's money. Talas packed his things with a terrible, final efficiency. The fight was no longer for the land. It was for his brother's soul. He walked to the edge of the canyon and looked down. Eliza followed him. "Crow's men will be at every pass," he said, his voice flat. "The checkpoints are up. They are looking for you. The open trails are a killing ground." He pointed down, far below. A thin silver ribbon of water snaked through the canyon floor. The river. "The water is low," he said. "It is the end of the dry season. The rapids will be uncovered. The stones are sharp. It is dangerous." Eliza looked at the treacherous path. It looked impossible. "But they will not look for us there," Talas finished. "They believe no one is foolish enough to try it. We go by the river." The climb down to the river was a betrayal of the feet. They moved for an hour along a path that was little more than a deer track, a narrow ledge of crumbling sandstone. Talus moved with the steady, balanced grace of a man who had been born in the vertical world. Eliza, in her torn shoes, stumbled, her hands raw from gripping the rock. He did not offer his hand. He expected her to keep up, and she did. Her pride was a harder stone than the cliff face. At the bottom, the air was thick and humid, trapped between the canyon walls. The river was, as he had said, low. It was a muscular, angry ribbon of water, not a placid stream. It hissed as it tore past the bones of black volcanic rock that littered its bed. Talus had a small, flat-bottomed boat hidden beneath a pile of brushwood. It was old, its wood gray and splintered. "This will not hold us," Eliza said, looking at the cracks in its hull. "It will hold," Talus replied. He pushed it into the shallows. "Get in. Sit in the center. Do not move." He pushed them off, using a long pole to guide them into the current. The black horse was tied by a long lead, forced to swim behind them, its eyes wide with fear. The current seized them immediately. The canyon walls, which had seemed so distant, now rushed past. The world shrank to the roar of the water and the scrape of the pole against stone. "Ahead," Talus said, his voice tight. "The narrows. Hold on." Eliza saw it. The river squeezed between two massive boulders, dropping 3 feet into a churning cauldron of white water. The boat, caught in the accelerating flow, turned sideways. The pole Talus shouted. He jammed it against the rock, trying to straighten them, but the wood was slick. The pole slipped. The boat struck the first boulder with a crack that sounded like a gunshot. The impact threw Eliza forward. The boat tipped, water pouring over the side, a cold, violent flood around her ankles. They were going over. The horse screamed behind them. In that second of chaos, Eliza saw the rope. It was coiled at the bow, a small, makeshift anchor tied to its end. She did not think. She grabbed the heavy stone anchor, braced her feet against the far side of the boat, and threw it. She did not aim for the shore. She aimed for a snag of rock in the center of the rapids, a dark tooth just visible above the foam. The rope went taut. It snapped with the force of a bullwhip. It tore through her hands, slicing the skin of her palms open. She screamed, but she did not let go. She wrapped the rope around her wrist, locking her arm against the wooden seat. The boat stopped. It slammed to a halt, swinging violently in the current, half full of water, but it did not capsize. It held. Talus, thrown to his knees, recovered instantly. He grabbed the pole and used the anchor line's tension to pivot them. He jammed the pole deep, found purchase, and pushed. The boat, groaning in protest, slid past the main rock and into the calmer water beyond. Eliza fell back, breathing hard. Her hands were on fire. She was soaked, shaking. Talus pulled them to a small, sandy bank. He pulled the boat ashore and then attended to the horse, calming the terrified animal. Only when the horse was secure did he turn to her. She was trying to examine her hands in the twilight. They were a mess, the skin laid open, bleeding freely into the river water she was trying to use to clean them. He said nothing. He knelt in front of her. He took a small tin from his saddlebag and opened it. It was a dark, greasy salve that smelled of pine and juniper. He took her right hand, his grip surprisingly gentle. His hands were calloused and strong, but his touch was light. He began to clean the wound, his movements efficient, impersonal. "You think fast," he said, his voice low. "I did not want to drown," she replied, wincing as the salve stung her raw skin. "You cost me a good rope," he said, but there was no anger in it. He wrapped both her hands in strips of clean cloth. "We camp here. The horse cannot travel more in the dark." They built a small fire, shielded by the high bank. The warmth felt like life itself, for the first time in days. Eliza felt something other than fear. She watched him. He was staring into the flames, but she knew he was not seeing them. He was seeing the fire he had carried with him since the storm. "What did you see?" she asked, her voice soft. "In the cave, during the storm, the fire." Talas did not look at her. He watched the flames dance. He was silent for so long she thought he would not answer. "I saw my home," he said at last. "I saw the night the land hunters came, the white men who wanted our pasture. They came in the dark, with torches. They said they had paper." He picked up a stick and pushed it into the heart of the fire. "My wife, she was inside, and my brother, Ashki. He was only a boy, 15. I was out, hunting. I saw the smoke from miles away. When I got back, there was nothing left, just flames. The smell, burning pine, and..." He stopped. "I found my wife. I never found Ashki. The fire took him, all of him, until today." He looked at her then, his eyes furnaces of a grief so old it had burned down to cold embers. "Now I find he is alive, and he is one of them. He is a land hunter." Eliza looked at her own bandaged hands. "They price us," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "They put a tag on us and tell us what we are worth." Talas looked at her, confused. "Kincaid." "Before him," she said, "I was in an orphanage, in Boston. They taught us to sew, to cook, to be useful. One day, a woman came. She wanted a maid. She inspected us. She looked at my teeth. She made me hold my hands out." Eliza held up her bandaged hands toward the fire. She said, "This one's hands are good, strong. She will last. I will pay $20 for her indenture." $20. I was a good horse. I was a strong mule. I was not a person. I was a price. She let her hands fall. "I know what it is. To have someone else tell you what your value is. Your brother, perhaps he just wanted to be worth something, even if it was the wrong price." A new silence settled between them, different from the one before. It was not empty. It was filled with the weight of their shared confessions. They were no longer just a Navajo guide and a white woman. They were two people who had seen their worlds burn. The next day, he taught her to ride the horse, not side saddle, but astride, like a man. "You cannot fight a river or run from a Pinkerton sitting sideways," he said, pulling her up. "You are not cargo. You are a rider." She was clumsy, but she was brave. He taught her to read the world as he did. He showed her the tracks of a deer, and how to tell how old they were. He showed her how the wind left patterns in the sand, telling which way the next storm would come. She learned. She listened. They found Luis and Rosa's homestead 2 days later. It was a small, defiant patch of green in a world of brown. A one-room adobe hut, a few goats, and a small, irrigated patch of corn. They found it just as 3 men on horseback were pulling down the fence. "This is company land," one of the men shouted. He was not a Pinkerton. He was a local thug, hired for intimidation. "You have no water rights. Get out." Luis, a small, wiry man with a face like tanned leather, stood in front of his wife. Rosa. He held a shovel. "We have been here 10 years. We paid our taxes." The man on horseback laughed and unholstered his pistol. "Your taxes are late, old man. Now get..." Talas did not shout. He rode his horse out from the trees. The rifle was in his hand. "Leave them." The 3 men turned, surprised. "Who in hell are you, an Injun and a..." "Is that the whore from Dry Willow?" Eliza, on her own horse, felt the old shame rise, hot and quick. Talas fired. The shot kicked up dirt at the lead man's feet. I said, "Leave." The man cursed and raised his pistol, but Talas was already moving. He was off his horse, a knife in his hand. The fight was short and brutal. He was not a brawler. He was a warrior. He moved under the man's guard and used his own weight against him, pulling him from the saddle. The other 2 men charged. Eliza, remembering the lantern, spurred her horse to the side, screaming, dragging a section of the broken fence. The horses shied, breaking their charge. It was all the opening Talas needed. He disarmed one and sent the other fleeing with a shallow cut to his arm. They rode off, cursing, leaving their leader on the ground. Luis and Rosa stared, stunned. Eliza Rosa whispered, her eyes wide, "It is you." That evening, inside the small hut, Eliza gave them the map. Luis unrolled it. His face went pale. "Madre de Dios." "Eliza, this is not our map." "What, it is not?" "No," Luis said, his finger tracing the lines. "This is Kincaid's map. This is the whole valley. This shows all the springs, not just the river, the underground water. This is the deed to the whole world." Eliza finally understood what she had been carrying. Luis looked at her, his eyes filled with a new respect. "You brought this back. You saved us. We have nothing, but we have this." He went to a loose floorboard and pulled out a heavy, leather-bound ledger. "Kincaid says we all owe back taxes. He uses it to take the land, but this is the real book, the county tax record. From before Crow, from when Sheriff Ortega's father was the assessor. It shows we are all paid. It shows Kincaid's claims are lies. It shows who he paid to change the new books." He handed the heavy ledger to Eliza. "You have the water. Now you have the truth." At the same time, in Dry Willow, a lone figure slipped a small, leather journal beneath the door of Mag's saloon. Reverend Pike watched from the shadows, then retreated to his broken chapel, his hands clean of the envelope, his soul still heavy. That night, the sky over Dry Willow glowed red, but it was not the sunset. Deputy Crow, with 2 of Kincaid's men, stood watching the town's main supply store burn to the ground. "Terrible," Crow said, loud enough for the gathering crowd. "Those Navajo, they're angry about the checkpoints. This is their answer. The lie, like the fire, spread fast." Miles away, Talis was met on the trail by Atsa. She had come to him. She tied a small, silver cord, braided with turquoise, onto the heavy bracelet on his wrist. "You have a new oath," she said. "The fire took your family. Do not let its memory make you blind. You must protect the weak. You must protect the truth. This woman is the truth." As the cord was knotted, the young Navajo rider returned. He had ridden from Dry Willow. His news was stark. "It is confirmed. Talas," he said, his voice broken. "It was Ashki. He was with Crow. He held the torch to the store. He pointed his rifle at our people when they tried to put the fire out. He is one of them." Talas closed his eyes. The last ember of hope for his brother died, leaving only a cold, hard ash. The news of his brother's betrayal had settled on Talis like a shroud. He moved with a grim, hollowed-out purpose, his silence deeper than the canyon. They left the small homestead of Luis and Rosa before dawn, carrying the heavy tax ledger and the map that was a death sentence for Kincaid's plans. They followed the river, as it was still the safest path. But the water itself felt heavy, burdened with the secrets they carried. They traveled until the moon was high and full, a perfect white disk that bleached the canyon walls. The river here was slow and wide, pooling in a deep bend that was as flat and reflective as a sheet of dark glass. Talas stopped. "We rest here," he said. The horse needed water, and they both needed to sleep. Eliza slid from the saddle, her body aching. She was coated in the grime of their Journey River mud, sweat, the grit of the canyon, and the dried blood from the fight at the homestead. She looked at the water. It was the first still water she had seen in days. It looked clean. She looked at Talis. He was already unsaddling the horse, his back to her, focused on the animal. "I am going to wash," she said, her voice quiet. He did not turn, but he gave a single nod. He led the horse 50 yards down the bank, giving her the pool, giving her the privacy. It was an act of quiet, unthinking decency. Eliza went to the water's edge. She unwrapped the crude bandages from her hands. The wounds were clean, but raw. She untied her boots and slipped out of her heavy, torn dress. She stood for a moment in her thin chemise, a pale shape in the moonlight, and then stepped into the water. It was shockingly cold, she gasped, but the cold was a clean fire. burning away the filth and the fear. She waded deeper, until the water was at her waist. She submerged herself, the silence of the water closing over her head. She surfaced, sputtering, and began to scrub her skin. Her hair. The river was washing away the handprints of the men in the alley, the shame of being called property, the dust of the run. Tala stood with the horse, his back to her. He was a sentinel, watching the dark line of the canyon rim. He could hear the soft sounds, the splash, the sharp intake of her breath as the cold hit her. He did not want to look. He respected the line he had drawn between them. But a sound, a small scrape of rock from the cliff above, made him turn. His eyes scanned the rim, finding nothing. His gaze dropped, instinctively checking his perimeter, and he saw her. He froze. She was standing in the center of the pool. The moonlight struck the water and shattered, reflecting upward, illuminating her. He saw the white line of her shoulders, her arms, her face tilted up to the sky. He saw not a woman, but a form made of water and light. She looked strong and new and terribly vulnerable. A feeling he had buried with his wife, a deep, protective ache, rose in his chest. It was mixed with a sharp, sudden heat. He turned his back. Instantly. His jaw was tight. He was ashamed. Not that he had looked, but that he had felt. He was a man of ghosts and vengeance. He had no right to such feelings. He heard her leave the water, heard the soft shiver of her breath in the cold night air. She was freezing. He did not turn. He untied the heavy woolen cloak from his saddle roll. It was his only warmth, the thing he wrapped in to fight the desert night. He walked backward toward the pool, his eyes fixed on the far wall of the canyon. He stopped, holding the cloak out behind him, and let it fall onto a large, flat boulder by the water's edge. Then he walked away, back to the horse, his posture rigid. Eliza, wrapping her thin, damp blanket around herself, saw the cloak. It was a dark, heavy shape on the rock. It was his. She hesitated, then walked to it. She touched the wool. It was coarse, and it smelled of him wood smoke, pine, and the clean, metallic scent of the high desert. She dropped her wet blanket and pulled the heavy cloak around her body. The warmth was immediate. It was absolute. It felt like a shield. He turned then. Seeing that she was covered, he walked toward her, stopping a few feet away. They stood in the heavy silence, the river whispering beside them. He saw the way the cloak enveloped her. He saw her bandaged hands. He made a decision. It was not a thought. It was an instinct, as sure as breathing. His hand went to his left wrist. He fumbled with the clasp of the heavy silver bracelet, the bracelet his grandmother had given him, the bracelet that held the new silver and turquoise cord. He pulled it free. The skin beneath it was pale. He held it out to her. Eliza stared at it. The hammered silver caught the moonlight. "No," she whispered. "I cannot. That is yours. That is your family." Atsa tied this cord to it, he said, his voice rough. She said it was an oath, to protect the weak, to protect the truth. He looked at her, his eyes dark and unblinking in the moonlight. "You are the truth, Eliza." His hand, calloused and hard, touched hers as he pressed the heavy silver into her palm. The metal was still warm from his body. The touch was not a spark. It was a brand. It was the deliberate, silent transfer of a vow, an acknowledgement of a bond that neither of them had words for. Her fingers closed around it. She was trembling. She looked down at the bracelet, then up at his face. He had given her his protection. He had given her his past. With her unsteady, bandaged hands, she fumbled with the clasp. She secured the heavy silver bracelet around her own thin wrist. It was too large. It hung heavy, like a beautiful, noble shackle. "I will wear this," she said, her voice thick, "to remember the one who treated me like a person." A sharp bird call, out of place in the deep night, broke the moment. Talas was instantly alert, his hand moving to his knife. A boy emerged from the shadows, leading a mule. He was young, perhaps 14. And he was the cousin of Luis. He had ridden hard from the settlement. "I bring news," the boy said, his eyes wide as he looked at Talis. "From Mags Doyle." "Mags, the saloon owner. She said to tell you Kincaid does not wait for the law. His men are in the valley now. They are driving stakes for the railroad, straight through the heart of the springs. He has posted notices in Dry Willow. He is using the store fire as an excuse. He says the town needs the railroad for military protection from the hostile Navajo. He is claiming the entire water artery for the company."
This was it, the final move.
The boy was not finished. I was stopped on the trail by Sheriff Ortega. He saw I was from the settlement. He looked frightened. He said to find you. He said, "Tell the Navajo I cannot win with the law. My badge is tin, and Kinsid's money is gold. I cannot fight him in the office. He owns the paper." Then he said, "Tell them, if they have proof, they must show it to the people." Not to me, to the people. The market day is in 2 days. It is the only chance we have. The only one. Eliza looked at Talis. Her hand closed around the silver bracelet on her wrist. "The ledger," she said, "and the map. That is the proof." "It is a trap," Talis said. "The town will be full of his men. Crow, the Pinkertons." Ortega said to show the people. Eliza insisted, her voice gaining strength. "If we wait, there will be nothing left to show. Mag said he is moving now. He is stealing the water as we stand here. We cannot let him." Talis looked at the heavy ledger the boy had helped carry. He looked at the woman wearing his bracelet. She was right. This was not a fight that could be won in the canyons. It had to be finished where it began, in Dry Willow. "We go back," Talis said. "We will ride the high trails. We will be there by market day. We will show the people the truth." He turned to prepare the horse. His decision was made. He stopped. He was looking across the river. The moonlight was so bright it was almost day, but a day of silver and black. On the far bank, perhaps 50 yards away, a lone rider sat on a dark horse. He was watching them. Eliza saw him too. He was not a Pinkerton. He was Navajo. He wore the long duster of Kincaid's company men. Talis did not move. He did not reach for his rifle. He just stood, staring. It was Ashki. He was too far to see the detail of his face, but not too far to see its shape. He sat his horse with a defiant stillness. He had been following them. He knew where they were. He knew what they were doing. Talis raised one hand, a stark, simple gesture, a greeting, a question, a condemnation. Ashki did not return it. Eliza could feel the stare, even from across the water. It was not the stare of a simple villain. It was the complex, burning gaze of the damned. It was shame, and it was anger, and it was a terrible, broken pride. He knew his brother was watching. He knew he had been seen. For a long minute, the two brothers held the silence across the river. Then, slowly, Ashki pulled his horse's head around. He did not look back. He kicked the horse and disappeared into the black shadows of the far bank. Talis turned away. The last piece of his old life was gone. The brother he had mourned was truly dead. The man who wore his face was a stranger. "Let us go," he said, his voice hollowed out. "We have work to do." Market day in Dry Willow was a clot of noise and dust. The fire at the supply store had soured the air, and the new checkpoints manned by Kincaid's men made everyone tense. People traded goods with one eye on their wagons and the other on the Pinkertons who patrolled the street. The square was crowded. Ranchers, townsfolk, and a few Navajo families had all gathered, their business a mix of commerce and fear. Into this, Talis and Eliza arrived. They came not from the main road, but from the alleys, appearing suddenly in the center of the square. Talis led his black horse. Eliza walked beside him. She wore the heavy silver bracelet on her wrist, open for all to see. She carried the heavy tax ledger in one arm. She looked neither left nor right. She walked with a purpose that silenced the haggling around her. They stopped at the town's main notice board, a wide plank of wood nailed to the front of the burned-out store. It was covered with Kincaid's new ordinances and a warrant, signed by Deputy Crow, for the arrest of Eliza Hart. Eliza took a breath. She unpinned the warrant. She tore it in two and let the pieces fall into the dust. A hush fell over the square. She took the map of the water springs, Kincaid's master plan, and unrolled it. It was large. She used 4 tacks to pin it up, covering the other notices. Then she opened the heavy tax ledger and set it on a crate below the map. Beside it, she placed the small, leather journal left by Reverend Pike, open to the page that detailed his shame. The crowd began to form a circle around them. They whispered, "That was the girl, the runaway. Look at her. Look at the Navajo." "You have been lied to," Eliza said. Her voice was not loud, but it was clear, and it carried in the sudden silence. "You have been told you owe money. You have been told you are trespassing. You have been told the fire was the fault of the Navajo." She tapped the ledger. "This is the real tax book. This is Mr. Abernathy's book. It says you are paid." She tapped the map. "And this is the real plan. Mr. Kincaid's plan. Not just for a railroad, but to steal the water. All of it. The river and the springs beneath the ground." "Lies." The voice cut through the crowd. Silas Kincaid pushed his way to the front. He was flanked by Deputy Crow and 4 Pinkertons. Kincaid was not wearing his black suit. He was dressed for work, in riding trousers and high boots. He looked at the map and he laughed. "These are pathetic forgeries," Kincaid announced to the crowd. "The desperate act of a thief and a runaway whore. She stole my private papers, and now she twists them to try and save her skin." Crow stepped forward, his hand on his pistol. He relished this moment. "Eliza Hart," he boomed, pulling a new warrant from his pocket. "You are under arrest for the theft of company property, for conspiracy, and for the arson of the supply store." He reached out to grab her. "And you, Navajo, you are under arrest for harboring a fugitive." Crow lunged for Eliza's arm. A blur of steel sang through the air. Talas's knife, thrown from 10 feet away, slammed into the wooden notice board. It buried itself 2 inches deep, pinning Crow's new warrant clean through the center. The handle quivered, a sharp, violent vibration. Crow froze, his hand 6 inches from the blade. Talas had not moved. He stood by his horse. "She is not going with you." The crowd gasped. The Pinkertons drew their pistols, aiming them at Talas. Sheriff Kincaid roared, "Looking for Ortega. Do your job, arrest this man, arrest them both." Sheriff Ortega pushed his way through, his face pale and sweating. He saw the Pinkertons' guns. He saw Talas, who was now armed only with the knife on his belt. He saw the ledger. "Talas," Ortega pleaded, his hand on his own empty holster. "Do not make me do this. Put your hands up. We can talk about this, lawfully." "What law, Sheriff?" The voice came from the saloon steps. Mags Doyle. She was not alone. She was helping a frail, white-haired man who leaned heavily on a cane. "You all know Mr. Abernathy," Mags said, her voice like iron. "He was the county assessor for 20 years. Before Mr. Kincaid bought his replacement." Abernathy was old, but his eyes were clear. He pointed a shaking finger at the ledger on the crate. "That is my book," he said, his voice surprisingly strong. "That is the true record. I kept it. I hid it when Deputy Crow told me I was retired. Kincaid's men offered me $500 for that book. I told them no. They told me I should take a long vacation. For my health." He looked at the crowd, at the faces of the people he had known his whole life. "Your taxes are paid. Luis and Rosa are paid. Kincaid's new ledger is a lie. This is the truth." The silence that followed was absolute. The crowd was no longer a crowd. It was a jury. They looked at Kincaid. Kincaid's face was smooth. The amusement was gone. He had lost the paper war. He had lost the people. He looked at his lead Pinkerton, a man with cold, gray eyes. He gave a single, almost invisible nod. The Pinkerton fired his pistol into the air. The shot was the only answer Kincaid had left. Panic erupted. The crowd screamed and surged, trying to get away from the guns. A woman fell. Horses reared, chicken crates overturned. It was instant, blinding chaos. The Pinkertons did not fire into the crowd. They advanced, using the panic they had created, swinging their pistol butts. Clear the square. Clear the square. By order of the company. A rancher, trying to protect his wife, shoved a Pinkerton. The man turned and struck him in the face. The rancher fell. The brawl began, townsfolk against the company men. Across the square, hidden in the alley by the blacksmith, Ashki watched. He had his rifle. His orders were to cover Kincaid, to stop any threat. He watched the chaos. He saw the Pinkertons advancing. He saw Tallis pull Eliza behind the horse for cover. Then he saw the child, a little girl, a settler's daughter, no more than 4 years old. She had been dropped in the panic. She sat in the middle of the street, crying, stunned. A team of horses, still attached to a wagon, broke free, their eyes rolling in terror. They were stampeding directly toward the child. Ashki did not think. He did not weigh his options. He moved. He sprinted from the alley, a brown streak moving faster than anyone could follow. He grabbed the girl, sweeping her up. He did not stop running. He dove, rolling with her over the boardwalk and into the dust by Maggs's saloon, just as the wagon wheels splintered the spot where she had been. He pushed the girl toward her mother, who was crawling toward them, screaming. "Get her inside!" he yelled. He stood up. He was breathing hard, confused by his own body. He looked across the square, and through the dust and smoke, he saw Tallis. His brother was watching him. Tallis had seen the whole thing. Ashki felt a wave of shame so hot it was like a physical blow. He turned and vanished into the swirling dust, running from his brother, running from himself. In the chaos, Deputy Crow saw his chance. Kincaid was already backing away, moving toward the livery. But Crow was not done. He was a man consumed by his own small power. He wanted Eliza. He burst through the crowd, grabbed Eliza by the arm, and wrenched her away from Tallis. "You are coming with me, you bitch!" he snarled. He dragged her backward, pulling her into the narrow alley between the sheriff's office and the hotel. Eliza Tallis roared. He saw Kincaid escaping, but he saw Crow take Eliza. He did not hesitate. He ran into the alley after them. It was dark and narrow. Crow had Eliza pressed against the wall. He had his pistol to her head. "That is far enough. Navajo," he spat. "You lost! Your proof is burning!" Tallis looked. One of the Pinkertons, in the square, had overturned the crate. The map and the ledger were on fire. "Now, you drop your knife," Crow said, "or I will paint this wall with her." Tallis looked at the man. He was desperate. He was stupid. And he was fast. Tallis let his belt knife fall to the dust. He stood empty-handed. "I should have known," Crow sneered. "A whore who sides with a savage." Eliza was not the girl from the wagon. She was not the girl in the storm. She was the woman who had crossed the rapids. She drove her heel down, hard, onto Crow's boot. The deputy roared in pain, his foot breaking under the force. His grip on her hair loosened for just a second. It was all she needed. She slammed her head back, striking him under the chin. His teeth snapped shut, and he stumbled back, releasing her. He raised his pistol, his face a mask of rage. He was not aiming at her. He was aiming at Tallis. Tallis was already moving. Crow fired. The explosion was deafening in the alley. Tallis felt a pure, clean line of fire rip through his left side. Just above the hip, the force of the bullet spun him against the adobe wall. He did not fall. Crow laughed. A short, ugly bark. He steadied his aim for the killing shot. "Now you die." Tallis pushed off the wall. He was inside the gun's range before Crow could pull the trigger again. He did not strike. He crashed into him. A shoulder charge fueled by a single, final burst of adrenaline. He was stone. Crow was just a man. They hit the back wall of the alley. Crow's head struck the stone with a sickening, wet crack. His body went limp. The pistol clattered to the ground. Crow slid down the wall and lay still, his eyes open and empty. Talus leaned against the wall, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He looked down. A dark, spreading stain was soaking his shirt. He pressed his hand to it. Eliza rushed to him, grabbing his arm.
Talus, you are hit. Oh God, you are hit.
It is nothing, he ground out, but the ground was unsteady beneath his feet. The square was emptying. The gunfire had stopped. The Pinkertons were pulling back, disappearing. They had done their job. The evidence was destroyed. The riot was started. Eliza looked frantically toward the street.
Kincaid. Where was Kincaid?
A man ran into the alley. It was the young rider who had brought the news from Mags. Talus Kincaid, I saw him. He got his horse. He is riding east, out of town. He was carrying powder. A whole saddlebag of blasting powder. Eliza looked at Talus. Their eyes met. They both knew. Kincaid had lost the town. He had lost the paper war. So he would take the only thing left, the water. He was going to the dam. He was going to flood the valley, wash away the Navajo camps, and destroy the river itself. Talus pushed himself off the wall, his hand clamped tight to his side, blood seeping between his fingers. "We must stop him," he said. Talus grabbed his horse's reins from the young rider. He tried to swing into the saddle, but a hot, white spike of pain from his side buckled his knee. He collapsed against the animal's flank, gasping. "You cannot ride," Eliza said, her voice shaking but firm. She was at his side, holding him. "You are bleeding too much." "Kincaid will not wait." Talus grunted. He pushed himself up, his face slick with sweat. He managed to get his foot in the stirrup and hauled himself onto the horse's back. He swayed, his vision blurring at the edges. Sheriff Ortega ran into the alley, his face grim. He had seen Kincaid ride out. He is going for the dam. He will flood the valley. It is the only card he has left. "We must go," Talus said, his voice a strained whisper. Eliza looked at the wound. It was dark, a steady, pulsing flow. He would not make it halfway. He would bleed out in the saddle. She had seen Atsa clean wounds. She had watched the old woman stitch a cut on a shepherd's arm. "Give me the needle," she said to the young rider. "From your saddlebag. The sinew and the needle? Now." The boy, stunned, fumbled in his bag and produced a small, oiled leather packet. Eliza took it. She unrolled it, finding a sharp, curved bone needle and a length of dried sinew. She looked at Talus.
"Ride, and do not fall off."
She grabbed the reins of the boy's mule, swung herself onto its back, and kicked it forward, pressing her leg against Talus's. "Go ride." They burst from the alley, a desperate, lurching group, Ortega and Mags, followed by a dozen townsfolk and ranchers who had seen the ledger burn, ran for their own horses. They rode east, a small, ragged army, chasing a madman. The sun was gone. The sky to the west was a deep, bruised purple, and the first forks of lightning split the air. A storm, not a sandstorm, a rainstorm, the first of the season. The wind was cold and smelled of ozone and wet dust. "Hold him steady," Eliza shouted to the young rider, who rode on Talus's other side, trying to keep him from slumping. Eliza pulled the mule so close she was pressed against Talus.
"This will hurt."
She threaded the sinew through the eye of the needle. The horses were galloping, their hooves pounding a desperate rhythm on the hard-baked earth. Talus grit his teeth. "Do it." Eliza leaned across the small gap between them. She held the lips of the wound together with her left hand. The heavy silver bracelet on her wrist was cold against his hot skin. With her right hand, she pushed the needle through his flesh. Talus roared. It was an inhuman sound, torn from his lungs, lost in the rising wind. His horse shied, but the young rider held it fast. Eliza did not stop. She pulled the sinew tight. She set the next stitch, and the next. She worked with a grim, focused fury. Her world reduced to the lurching ride, the needle, the flesh, and the man. She was not a maid. She was not a victim. She was a healer in the middle of a war, stitching a man back together at a full gallop, under a sky that was breaking apart. She finished the last stitch and tied the knot. It was a crude, ugly piece of work, but the bleeding had slowed to a dark, sluggish ooze. She tore a strip from her own skirt and packed the wound tight. Talas was pale, his body shivering, but his eyes were clear. He looked at her. It was a look of raw, profound respect. He had seen what she was made of. They reached the foothills of the canyon just as the sky opened. Rain began to fall, not in drops, but in solid, cold sheets. The dry arroyos around them began to hiss as the water moved. Ortega pulled his horse up. "We cannot all ride the high trail. He will hear us. We must split up." He looked at the men behind him. They were townsfolk, not fighters. "He has to come out somewhere. Kincaid, he knows the trails. We will take the low road, the main trail out of the valley. We will block his escape." Ortega had found his spine. It was made of his father's old tax book. He looked at Talas. "Can you make the climb?" Talas nodded, his hand pressed to his side. "The dam. I can make it. You will not go alone." A figure stepped out from the rocks. Ashki. He was on foot, his duster soaked, his rifle in his hand. He was not wearing the company hat. His face was a mask of shame and fury. "I heard the blast," Ashki said, his voice rough. "I saw him ride. He is a mad dog. He will kill our people." Talas stared at his brother. He saw the boy who saved the child. He saw the man who had held the torch. "The climb is steep," Talas said, his voice flat. "I know the climb," Ashki replied, not meeting his eyes. "I taught it to you." "Go," Ortega said to Talas. "Go. We will hold the valley floor. Godspeed." Ortega and his small posse thundered down the main canyon road, swallowed by the rain and the dark. Talas slid from his horse. He could ride no further. The climb had to be made on foot. He looked at his brother. Ashki pointed up, the goat trail. "It is the only way. He will not be watching it." They began to climb. The cliff face was slick with rain. The lightning was constant now, illuminating the world in stark, blue-white flashes. The thunder was a physical blow, shaking the rocks they clung to. Talas climbed with one hand, the other pressed to his wound. He was leaving a faint trail of blood on the wet stone. Ashki climbed ahead of him, finding holds, testing them. He was swift, silent. He was a man caught between two worlds, and he was climbing toward his judgment. They reached a narrow ledge. Halfway to the top, the wind howled, trying to peel them from the rock. Talas slumped against the wall, his breathing shallow. He was not going to make it. "I am slow," Talas panted, the rain washing the sweat from his face. "Go, stop him." Ashki turned, his face inches from his brother's. In a flash of lightning, Talas saw the torment in his eyes. "Why?" Talas whispered. "Why did you join them, the fire?" "It was them." The fire took everything. Ashki's voice was a raw wound. You had her. You had a life. I had nothing. I was just the boy. Kincaid. He gave me money. He gave me a horse. He gave me a name. He said I was valuable." Eliza's words. He said I was valuable. He lied. Talas said, "I know." Ashki screamed into the storm. "I know he lied. I saw the girl. I held the torch. Brother, I held it. I am nothing." He was weeping, the rain and his tears indistinguishable. Talas looked at this broken, lost man who was his brother. He reached up, not to his wound, but to his neck. Eliza had tied the silver bracelet to a leather thong around his neck when his wrist was too swollen. No, That was not right. He had given her the bracelet. Eliza, she was not there. He looked at his own wrist. It was bare. No, the outline. Talis gave the bracelet to his brother. How? Wait, Eliza had given it back, in the alley, as he was bleeding. She had taken it from her own wrist and pressed it into his hand. You will need this more than I. He had put it in his pocket. Talis reached into his wet pocket. His fingers closed on the heavy, familiar silver. He pulled it out. The silver and turquoise cord was still tied to it. He held it out to Ashki. The fire did not take all of him, Talis said, his voice quiet in the heart of the storm. Atsa gave me this to protect the truth. The truth is, you are not Kincaid. You are my brother. He pressed the heavy bracelet into Ashki's hand. Do not let the fire take the rest of you. Ashki. Ashki stared at the silver. It was his family. It was his past. It was everything he had burned. His hand closed around it. He did not put it on. He just held it, a solid, heavy piece of his soul, returned. He looked up at his brother. He nodded. He pulled Talis's arm over his shoulder. We climbed together. They reached the top. The dam was a long, dark shape against the storm. It was a crude thing, built of timber and earth, holding back the small river that fed the valley. At the far end, a single lantern glowed. Kincaid. He was working fast, setting charges, a line of 3, drilled into the main timber supports. Below them, in the valley, a single light appeared. A lantern, moving fast. Eliza. She was not with Ortega. She had taken a different path. She was on foot, running toward the small Navajo camp on the valley floor. She was shouting, her voice torn away by the wind. She was waving the lantern. She was the warning. Kincaid saw the light. He cursed. No time, he roared to himself. He lit the fuse on the first charge. It sputtered, a small, angry snake in the rain. Kincaid, Talis yelled. Kincaid spun, his pistol in his hand. He saw the 2 Navajo brothers. He laughed, a high, thin sound. The dead have returned. You are too late. Savages. He fired. The bullet sparked off the rock near Talis's head. Ashki did not wait. He ran, low and fast, across the top of the dam. He was not running at Kincaid. He was running at the second and third charges. Talis, finding a last reserve of strength, charged Kincaid. It was not a fight. It was a collision. Talis, wounded, was still a force of nature. He crashed into Kincaid, and the 2 men went down, rolling on the slick, muddy timber. Kincaid's pistol went flying. He pulled a knife. He slashed upward, catching Talis in the arm. Talis grunted, ignoring the new pain. He brought his fist down, striking Kincaid in the jaw. Ashki reached the second charge. He grabbed the burning fuse and ripped it out. He moved to the third, grabbing the sizzling cord. It burned his hand, but he held it, crushing the spark out with his bare palm. Down below, Eliza had reached the camp. She was pulling people from their sleep, pushing them up the small gully, toward the high ground. The dam run. She was a lioness, a leader, her light a beacon in the terror. On the dam, the first charge exploded. The sound was a solid, physical wall. The timber support splintered. The dam did not collapse, but it tore. A 20-foot gap was ripped open. Talis and Kincaid were blown apart. Talis was thrown back against the rock wall. Kincaid was thrown onto the lower catwalk, a wooden beam that had snapped from its mooring. A wall of black water, the pent-up heart of the river, burst through the gap. It was not a flood. It was an arrow. Kincaid clung to the broken beam as the water surged around him. He had lost his knife. He was trapped. The water rose, pulling at him. He looked at Talis, who was clinging to the rock. Kincaid's face was a mask of disbelief. He had commanded this land. He had owned it. Now, it was claiming him. My railroad, he whispered. A second surge, carrying the debris of the dam, struck him. The broken beam he was on was torn free. It spun in the current, and Kincaid was swept away, a small, dark shape in the white foam. The river he had tried to weaponize had taken him. It was a swift, cold, and impartial judgment. The rest of the blasting powder, Kincaid's main supply, was on a small cart. The water, surging over the edge, caught the cart. It was pulled over the side, disappearing into the torrent. Ashki ran to Talas. His brother was slumped, unconscious, his blood mixing with the rain. Ashki lifted him. Eliza, on the ridge, saw the dam burst. She got the last of the families, a woman and her child, to the top of the gully just as the wall of water hit the valley floor. It was a monstrous, roaring beast, carrying mud and whole trees. It scoured the valley, wiping the small camp from the face of the earth. She watched it pass, her heart in her throat. The dam had held, but it was broken. The valley was drowned. The fight was not over. The dawn was not a birth. It was a wound. The sun rose on a world that had been drowned and remade in red mud. The flood waters had receded, leaving the valley floor a slick, steaming scar. Dry Willow was a swamp. The water had torn through the lower streets, shoving wagons into buildings and filling the hotel lobby with 2 feet of silt. Survivors emerged slowly, gray figures in a gray light. Eliza, having led the Navajo families to high ground, met Sheriff Ortega at the edge of town. His posse was soaked and grim. They had stopped no one. Then they saw him, Ashki. He walked out of the canyon mist, carrying his brother on his back. Talas was unconscious, his breathing shallow, but he was alive. Eliza's crude stitches had held. Ashki had wrapped his own duster around the wound, a last act of protection. "He is alive?" Ashki said, his voice scraped raw. He laid Talas down gently by a standing, unlit forge. Atsa was already there, as if she had been waiting. She knelt by her grandson, her face a map of ancient grief, and began to prepare herbs. News came at a run. A rancher, his face streaked with mud, staggered toward them. "They are in the square, the Pinkertons, the ones who started the fire. They have hostages." Ortega cursed. "How many?" "4 of them," the man gasped. "They lost. Kincaid is gone. They know it. They are like rats in a barrel. They have Mags, and Luis, and the Reverend, and a dozen others. They have them tied under the big cottonwood. They say they will shoot one every hour until they are given horses and safe passage." The town, broken and half drowned, now faced its final test. Ortega, his new militia of ranchers and townsfolk, and Ashki, carrying his rifle, moved through the mud-filled streets. They surrounded the square. The 4 Pinkertons were there, their faces desperate, their leader. The cold-eyed man from the market had his pistol to Mags Doyle's head. The hostages were huddled together at the base of the massive tree, their hands bound. "That is far enough," Ortega the leader shouted, his voice cracking. "We walk out of here, or she dies first. We want 4 horses and a clear road." Ortega held up a hand. "Let the women go. We can talk." No talk horses now. Atsa moved to the edge of the square. She held a bolt of white cloth she had taken from the wrecked general store. With her knife, she began to tear it into strips. She handed one to the rancher beside her. He took it. He tied it around his arm. She handed out another, and another. The white strips passed from hand to hand. A silent, binding ritual. They were not an army. They were a community. They were choosing life, and they would not be moved. The Pinkerton leader saw it. He saw the resolve. His hand tightened on his pistol. He was a desperate man, and he was about to make a fatal mistake. "Stop!" Eliza Hart walked into the middle of the square. She was covered in mud, her hair matted, her dress in ruins. The heavy silver bracelet was a single, clean thing on her wrist. She stopped, 20 yards from the tree. "Let them go," she said. The Pinkerton laughed, a short, ugly bark. "And who are you?" "I am the one you want," Eliza said. "I am the witness. Kincaid is gone. But I am the one who saw the papers. I am the one who brought the ledger. You let them go, and you can take me. I am your safe passage. I am your hostage. I am worth more than all of them. Mags Doyle's eyes widened.
Eliza, no.
Talas was awake. Ashki was holding him upright, propped against the blacksmith's wall. He had heard her.
Eliza, he roared, his voice weak but full of fire. He tried to stand, to go to her, but his legs would not hold him.
Eliza turned her head. She looked at him. It was a long, silent look. It was not a plea for permission. It was not a goodbye. It was a statement. She was no longer a parcel. She was no longer a price. She was a woman making a choice, and she was asking him, trusting him, to honor it. He met her gaze. He saw the woman who had thrown the lantern, the woman who had stitched his flesh at a full gallop, the woman who had offered him her truth by the fire. He stopped fighting Ashki's grip. He gave a single, agonized nod. His trust in her was absolute.
A fair trade,
the Pinkerton leader said, his eyes glittering. He was beaten, but he could still inflict one last wound. Let her walk over, slowly. Eliza took a step. A new voice cut across the square, a high, sneering voice she had prayed she would never hear again.
I should have known you would be too stubborn to die, Navajo.
The voice came from the roof of the saloon. Deputy Crow. He was alive. He was caked in mud. His face a mask of purple bruises. But he was standing. The body in the alley had not been his. It had been the oily man, killed by Talas's charge. Crow had only been knocked unconscious, and the flood had woken him. He was holding a rifle. He was not aiming at Eliza. He was aiming at Talas, who was exposed, leaning against the wall.
I told you I would finish you,
Crow hissed. Eliza screamed, No! It happened faster than a thought. Ashki had been standing beside his brother, watching. He saw the glint of the rifle barrel on the roof. He saw Crow's finger tighten on the trigger. He did not shout. He did not hesitate. He moved. He threw his body in front of his brother, a final act of redemption. The rifle cracked. Ashki did not make a sound. The bullet hit him square in the chest, throwing him backward. He did not fall away. He fell against Talas, his hand, the one that still clutched the heavy silver bracelet his brother had given him on the cliff, fumbled, grabbing for Talas's arm. Talas caught him. He held his brother as they slid down the wall into the mud. Ashki, Talas whispered, his voice broken. Ashki looked up. The hate was gone from his eyes. The shame was gone. He was just the boy from the fire. He smiled, a small, bloody quirk of his lips. I saw him. Brother, I did not let the fire take all. His hand opened. The silver bracelet, Talas's bracelet, fell into Talas's palm. Ashki's hand closed around his brother's, held it tight, and then he was still. Talas looked at his brother's face. He looked at the roof. The Pinkerton leader, stunned by the shot, had loosened his grip on Mags. A deep, animal sound of pure grief tore itself from Talas's throat. He was a wounded man. He was a broken man, but in that second, he was a storm. He took the pistol from Ashki's holster. He did not seem to aim. He raised the gun, his arm locked, his hand wrapped around his brother's, and he fired. One shot. On the roof, a small, dark hole appeared in the center of Crow's chest. He looked down, surprised. He dropped the rifle. He toppled forward and fell into the muddy street, his law of the jungle finished. The standoff was broken. The three remaining Pinkertons looked at their dead leader in the street. They looked at Talas, who was still holding the smoking pistol. They looked at the circle of townsfolk, all wearing white scarves, all silent, all watching. The Pinkertons dropped their guns. It was over. Ortega cut the hostages free. Mags ran to Eliza, pulling her into an embrace. Luis and Rosa wept. Talas did not move. He sat in the mud, holding his brother's hand. Eliza walked to him, kneeling beside him. She said nothing. She put her hand on his shoulder. He looked up at her. Then, slowly, he opened his hand. He looked at the silver bracelet, stained with Ashki's blood. He pressed it into Eliza's palm.
Eliza took it. She stood up and walked to Sheriff Ortega. She gave it to him.
Ortega looked at the heavy silver. He understood. He walked to Mags and placed it in her hand. Mags passed it to Reverend Pike. The Reverend passed it to Mr. Abernathy. The bracelet moved through the crowd. From rancher to settler. From white hand to Navajo hand. It was passed in silence. It was not a trophy. It was a promise, a covenant of shared justice, bought with blood. They buried Ashki that evening. As the sun set, they buried him at the base of the great cottonwood tree, the tree where the town had almost torn itself apart, and where it had finally come together. Tala stood by the grave, leaning on Ortega. Eliza stood with him. When the grave was filled, Eliza walked away. She returned minutes later. She was dragging something from a ruined house. It was a door. It was battered, but its white paint was still visible under the mud. She carried it to the cottonwood tree. She leaned it against the trunk, facing east, facing the new day. It was not a grave marker. It was a statement. It was a vow to rebuild. It was the first piece of their new home. The morning after the flood was a quiet reckoning. The town of Dry Willow was unrecognizable, its main street a riverbed of drying, red mud, but the silence was not empty. It was filled with the sound of shovels. Sheriff Ortega stood on the warped porch of Mag's saloon, which was one of the few buildings high enough to have been spared the worst of the water. He had tacked a fresh piece of paper to the wall. He did not call it a trial. He called it a town meeting. The three Pinkertons, disarmed and disowned, sat on the steps, guarded by two ranchers. The rest of the town gathered. The Navajo families, led by Atsa, stood side by side with the settlers. They were no longer two peoples. They were survivors. Ortega was not a polished speaker. He held up the mud-caked, charred remains of the ledger. You all saw what happened. You all heard Mr. Abernathy. You know the truth. Kincaid's law is dead. His paper is ash. He looked at the Pinkertons. You men served a criminal. You acted against the law of this territory. You incited a riot. You aided in arson. Under normal circumstances, you would hang. The men paled. But these are not normal circumstances, Ortega continued, his voice heavy. He looked at the grave under the cottonwood, and at Talas, who sat nearby, his side wrapped in clean bandages, his face a mask of grief. We have seen enough death. We have seen a man die for his brother. We have seen another die in his own mud. He pointed north. Your horses are yours. You will ride out. You will not stop until you are out of this territory. If you are ever seen here again, the law you broke will be the last thing you see. Go! The three men did not need to be told twice. They walked to their horses, mounted, and rode away, never looking back. Now, Ortega said, turning to the crowd, the matter of our town. Reverend Pike stepped forward. He was a changed man. The weakness was gone, replaced by a deep, hollowed shame. He held the white envelope Kincaid had given him. It was waterlogged, the money stained. I was a coward, Pike said to the assembled people, his voice clear. I spoke of God, but I served money. This was a bribe. Mr. Kincaid called it a donation. I called it a donation. We were both liars. It was the price for my silence. He walked to the table and placed the wet bills on it. I cannot keep it. The chapel does not want it. This money is stained. It belongs to the people who were harmed. Abernathy, the old assessor, nodded. It is a start. Ortega looked at the money. This is the first deposit in the Dry Willow Community Fund. It will be used to rebuild what was lost, the store, the homes, and it will be used to protect what we have saved. He looked at Atsa, the river, the water. We will establish a legal, shared water board. One man from the town, one from the ranches, and one from the Navajo. The water will be shared. By law, by our law. Never again will one man try to own what belongs to all. In the weeks that followed, the sound of hammers replaced the sound of gunfire. The mud was carted away. Buildings were righted. The town began to breathe again. A new group of men rode in, but they were not Pinkertons. They were engineers, surveyors for the main railroad line. Their leader, a practical man with blueprints under his arm, met with Mags Doyle, Sheriff Ortega, and Atza. Mr. Kincaid was a fool, the engineer said, sipping Mag's coffee. He was building on a floodplain. He was using fraudulent bonds. We had been tracking his operation for months. His route was a disaster. We are rerouting 20 miles to the north, along the high ridges. It is a stable, proper line. We have no interest in your valley, gentlemen and ma'am. Only an honest trade. Mags, acting as the town's new negotiator, nodded. You will have it, and you will pay for your timber. A new, fair contract was signed. The railroad, the beast that had almost destroyed them, would now be their partner. Talas did not participate in these meetings. He was healing, but the wound in his side was a dull, constant fire. The wound in his heart was colder and deeper. Atza had tended to him, her herbs pulling the fever from his body, but she could not mend his spirit. He sat for hours by the cottonwood tree, at the foot of his brother's grave, a silent, unmoving guardian. Eliza left him to his grief. She had her own work. She, Luis, and Rosa, along with 2 ranchers who owed her their homes, began to build. They did not build in the town. They chose a spot on the edge of the valley, a low bluff that overlooked the river, just 100 yards from the cottonwood tree. They salvaged timber from the flooded buildings. They used adobe bricks, made from the new mud. It was a small, 1-room cabin. It was rough. It was built by hand, by people who were not carpenters. Talas watched her. He watched her lift timbers she should not have been able to lift. He watched her hammer nails, her brow furrowed in concentration, her hands, like his, calloused and scarred. She was not the woman who had arrived on the wagon. She was not a victim. She was a builder. They saved the white door for last. Luis and Talas, who was now walking with a cane, lifted it. They set it in the frame. It opened outward, facing the river, facing the east. When the house was done, Atza came. She brought the silver bracelet. It had been passed through the whole town, a symbol of their new bond, and had been given back to Talas. He had, in turn, given it to his grandmother, the keeper of their ways. She held it up in the new, empty room. The air smelled of fresh-cut pine and drying mud. The land has been washed clean, Atza said, her voice filling the small space. The blood debt has been paid. The river has seen your hearts. It has seen your truth. She looked at Talas, and then at Eliza. You have built your house on this ground. You have honored the dead. The water accepts you. The earth accepts you. She handed the bracelet to Talas. This does not belong on a wrist. It belongs to the home. It is the oath. Talas took the heavy silver. He looked at Eliza. She nodded. Together, his hand covering hers, they reached up. They placed the bracelet on the rough central beam, just above the white door. It would be the first thing they saw when they left, and the last thing they saw when they returned. A reminder, a promise. That evening, Reverend Pike, his sermon for Sunday unwritten, was found behind his half-repaired chapel. He was not praying. He was digging. He had a small, young willow sapling. He placed it in the hole, tamping the earth around it with his own hands. It was a tree that would need much water. It was a quiet, living penance. The town grew quiet. The sun set. In the small cabin, Eliza lit a single lantern. Talas sat on a stool, staring at the empty hearth. He had not spoken all day. He is gone, Talas said, his voice rough. It was the first time he had spoken of Ashki since the burial. He died for me. Eliza stopped unpacking. She sat on a crate opposite him. No, she said, her voice gentle, but firm.
He did not die for you. He died for himself. He saw what Kincaid had made him. He saw the fire he had set. He spent the last second of his life reclaiming his own soul. He died a brother, Talas, not a company man. Talas looked up at her. The lantern light caught the lines of her face, the new strength in her eyes. He finally saw her, not as the woman he had rescued, but as the woman who had stood beside him, the woman who had saved him. He reached across the small space and took her hand. It was not the soft hand of a maid. It was the hard, capable hand of a builder. "I have nothing, Eliza," he whispered. "My past is ash. My wife is gone. My brother is gone." "We have the river," she said, her voice quiet. "We have this ground. We have this roof." "I will watch the water," he said. It was the ancient vow of his people. It meant he would protect the valley, protect the community. She covered his hand with her other. "And I will watch over you," she replied. It was not a passionate declaration. It was a promise, simple and solid as the earth beneath their feet. It was an oath as strong as the silver on the beam above them. It was enough. A sound made them both look up. A plink. A single drop of water had fallen from the new roof, landing on the floor. Eliza sighed. "Of course, after all their work, a leak." Plink. Another drop. Talas watched it. He looked at the ceiling, then at the small puddle. A low sound rumbled in his chest. It was a laugh. It was rusty, broken, but it was real. It was the first time she had ever heard it. He reached for an empty tin cup, the one he used for water. He hobbled over and placed it on the floor. Plink. The sound was small, metallic. Eliza looked at him, startled by the laugh. She saw the grief still in his eyes, a shadow that would never fully leave, but it was not the only thing there. Beside it, there was life. There was a man who was still here. A small smile touched her own lips. She pulled her crate closer to his stool. They sat together in their new home, in the darkness, listening to the sound of the first healing rain on their roof and the steady, imperfect beat of the water falling into the cup. The year was 1890. The sound that woke Dry Willow was not gunfire, and it was not the roar of a flood. It was the 5 o'clock whistle of the train. It was a clean sound, sharp in the cold desert air, and it spoke of schedules and mail and milled lumber. The new railroad line, the one that ran north along the high ridges, had been completed 3 months prior. It had kept its word. It brought trade, not troops. It brought passengers who paid for their tickets and remarked on the stark beauty of the land, blissfully unaware of the blood that had been spilled to keep it that way. The town itself was a testament to scarred survival. The main street, once a riverbed of drowning mud, was now wider, graded, and packed hard. The flood had washed away the weakest structures, and what was rebuilt was stronger. The burned-out shell of the general store had been torn down, and in its place, a new, larger building was rising, built of brick, not timber. It was being built by the men who had once followed Kincaid, the railroad workers who had stayed, choosing honest wages over a dead man's lies. Sheriff Ortega stood by the new town well. He was fastening a freshly painted sign to the post. He was a different man. The helplessness was gone, replaced by a quiet, steady authority. He had been re-elected. Not that there was any opposition. He hammered the final nail himself. The sign read, "By order of the citizens of Dry Willow, the water is the property of all." It was the town's new constitution, simple and ironclad. He looked at the sign, then at the cottonwood tree. He touched the brim of his hat, a silent salute to the grave beneath it. Across the street, Maggs's saloon was louder than ever, but the noise was different. The sign above the door now had a second, smaller sign beneath it, United States Post Office and Telegraph Station. M. Doyle, prop, Maggs herself, her hair grayer but her eyes sharper, stood behind her bar. One end of the bar was for whiskey, the other was covered in mail slots. a telegraph key, and stacks of paper. She had become the town's artery. She sorted mail, dispatched telegrams about cattle prices, and occasionally read letters for those who could not. She had become the community's memory, connecting the small, rebuilt town to the world beyond the canyons. She was fair, she was fast, and she still poured a stiff drink. Further down, near the fully repaired chapel, Reverend Pike was at his morning ritual. He was not on his knees praying. He was on his knees weeding. The willow sapling he had planted was now a thriving tree, its thin green branches reaching almost 6 feet. It was a thirsty tree, and he hauled 2 buckets of water for it every morning, an act of penance that had rebuilt the muscles in his arms and the faith in his own heart. He had spoken, after the flood, to Atsa. He had asked her, simply, how to atone. She had not given him scripture. She had looked at the burned land and said, "Do not talk, plant something." So he had traded his guilt for labor. At the edge of the square, the great cottonwood tree stood guard. The scar on its trunk from Talas's long-ago knife was still there, a pale line against the bark. But beneath it, the ground was tended. A simple, flat stone was set in the earth. It did not say how he died. It did not list his sins or his sacrifice. It just said, Ashki, a brother. The past was not erased, not forgotten, but it had been given its proper place. A mile up the valley, on the bluff overlooking the river, the small cabin stood finished. It was simple, strong, and it looked as if it had grown from the earth. The white door, the one Eliza had pulled from the mud, was bright in the morning sun. It was open, as it always was, letting in the sound of the water and the smell of juniper. Just above the door, on the main lintel, the heavy silver bracelet Talas had given his brother, and his brother had given back, was fixed. Its turquoise and silver caught the light. It was their shield, their promise. Eliza stood on the riverbank. The water was calm and clear, the spring melt making it run fast but gently. She had been washing clothes, but she had stopped, her hands resting. She wore a simple blue dress made of strong cotton. She looked healthy. The hollows in her cheeks, the marks of fear and starvation, were gone. Her body was stronger. She was rooted. She looked up at the cabin. Her hand went not to a bracelet, but to her own throat, where a simple, small piece of polished turquoise hung from a leather thong, a gift from Talas, from their first quiet winter. The cabin door creaked. Talas stepped out into the sunlight. He was not the hollowed-out man from the grave. His limp was almost gone, a slight stiffness in his left side that would always be with him, a reminder of Crow's bullet. He moved with the quiet grace of a man at peace in his own territory. He was wearing clean trousers and a loose cotton shirt. The long, silent grief for his brother had settled. It was no longer a fire. It was a deep, still pool. He was watching her. He was not alone. He was holding a bundle, wrapped in a soft, woven Navajo blanket. Eliza smiled. It was a slow, easy smile that lit her entire face. She dried her hands on her apron and walked up the bank toward him. He met her halfway. He shifted the bundle in his arms. Inside, a small, perfect face, copper-skinned and with a fuzz of dark hair, was waking up. A child, 3 months old, a son. He had Eliza's determined chin and Talas's dark, watchful eyes. "He is hungry," Talas said. His voice was quiet, a low rumble. "Everything is hungry in the morning," Eliza replied, her voice soft. She took the baby from him. The weight was familiar. "Welcome," the child fussed, turning his head, seeking her. She held him close. She sat on the small, smooth bench Talas had built by the white door, positioning herself in the warmth of the morning sun. As she began to feed the child, a profound, simple peace settled over the valley. This was not a prize. This was not a reward. This was life, continuing. It was the future, tangible and warm, held in her arms. Tala stood beside her. His hand rested on her shoulder. A simple, possessive, and gentle gesture. He looked out at the valley. His valley. The broken dam had been repaired, but not as it was. It was now lower. A weir that slowed the water but did not stop it. Governed by the new water board. He was the watcher of the water, and now he was a guardian of this new life. It is a hard land. This West, it does not forgive. It does not forget. It has a memory as long as the shadows, and it demands truth. In this land, a price is often shouted, paid in gold, or in steel, or in loud, empty words from men in black suits. A man like Kincaid can declare a price for anything for land, for water, for a human soul. He can call a person a parcel, an investment. But value is a different thing. Value is not declared. It is not bought. It has to be dug. It is dug by hand, with sweat and with pain. It is found in the dark, like a hidden spring. It is built, timber by timber, with scarred hands. It is defended, not with lawless guns, but with a united will. It is the cost of standing your ground. It is earned. Eliza Hart had been given a price. She had earned her value. Later that afternoon, the air was warm and smelled of pine. The baby was asleep inside, watched over by Atsa, who now spent many days at the cabin, teaching Eliza the stories of the rock and the river. Eliza and Talis walked from the house. They did not take a trail. They walked along the riverbank, the path they had made themselves, their steps falling in easy unison. They moved easily, in a comfortable silence that needed no words. He was no longer the silent, wounded warrior, locked in his past. She was no longer the frightened, bartered girl, running from a price tag. They were just a man and a woman, a husband and a wife, taking a walk. The sun was low behind them, sinking toward the western rim of the canyon. It cast their shadows long, stretching out in front of them onto the flat, dark earth. Their two shadows, walking side by side, fell in parallel lines, stark and clear, moving as one. They looked like the ties of a railroad track, not a track of steel and plunder, built on lies, but a new track, one made of their own choices, laid down one step at a time, leading them forward, leading them home. Thank you for listening to this story. I would love to hear where you are tuning in from, so please leave a comment below to connect and share your thoughts. Be sure to subscribe to my channel, Wild West Tales, and like this video. If you enjoyed the story, please support us by hitting that hype button, so this tale can be heard by many more.